Hey guys, Brad here from Scooter Street. Today's video will be the promised video of our shop zip of putting the performance exhaust on the bike and tuning it to suit. In the last video we put an MHR replica 70cc cylinder kit in the bike, and the video before that we put a 𝐂𝐿𝐲𝐝 Wild Line exhaust on the bike. And what this video was supposed to be was us comparing the performance of the 𝐂𝐿𝐲𝐝 Wild Line exhaust with the Yasuni exhaust, and showing you what the difference is in performance with the 70 kit and the two different exhausts. I'm just going to be installing a Yasuni 𝐴 exhaust on this bike, and then I'm going to tune the carburetor and the transmission to suit the exhaust. If you've been watching our channel for a while, you would know that as far as we're concerned, the MHR replica 70cc cylinder kit and the Yasuni 𝐴 exhaust are a match made in heaven. They go so well together. And the 𝐂𝐡𝐤 being one of our favourite scooters, with one of the best scooter engines, it's going to go really nicely on this bike. So I'm expecting this bike to be super zippy and super fun once we get this stuff in. So I'm going to get the bike up on the bench, we'll unbox the exhaust and probably look at putting it together and then putting it on the bike so we can worry about doing some tuning. Now, as you've probably already unfortunately heard, there's a massive air show going on nearby. So there's a bunch of crazy plane noises going to be in the background. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do, and I apologize in advance. I'm going to try and film around it, but these planes are super loud. Okie dokie, have our Yasuni 𝐴 here. Now, the first step would normally be to remove the factory exhaust off the bike. Now, in the last video, when we put the cylinder kit on the bike, we obviously did this already, and we haven't put a new exhaust on the bike yet. So, we get to skip this step today and get right at the fun bit, which is getting the performance exhaust together, and then we just can put it straight on the bike. Now, we've mentioned this many times in videos before with these Yasunis. They do come with two factory restrictors, which is a little bit annoying, but it's not too big of a deal to remove them. So, although we've done videos on removing them before, I'm going to show removing it in this video anyway, just because it is a helpful and useful thing to see. So, as with all Yasuni exhausts, we have our actual exhaust here. These R's are really beautiful, beautiful factory welds. So the first restrictor is in the header, at the top of the header here. Basically like a restrictor cone with a small pipe welded in the center. Now it's just tack welded on the edges. So we'll just break those tack welds and we'll be able to pull the restrictor out. Now the second restrictor is a bit more of a pain. It's actually in the silencer. Now unfortunately, to get it out you have to pull the whole silencer apart, remove the packing. So you're going to want some gloves for this because the packing's made of fiberglass wool and it will make your hands really itchy if you're not wearing gloves. But the second restrictor is just in the top of the silencer. So that's another one that just has to be cut out. It's just a couple of tack welds holding it in. So we'll cut those tack welds and then it'll slip out fairly easily after that. And then we'll just have to pop the silencer back together afterwards. Bracket kit over here. We're going to have to put that together before we put it on the bike. Makes it a lot easier than fiddling around when the exhaust is hanging off the header. You've got bits hanging out. That's not the time you want to be mucking around with bolts and washers. It's so much easier to pre-assemble it on the exhaust first. So I'm going to go ahead and probably grab our die grinder and start popping this silencer apart so we can get rid of these pesky restrictors. We're going to attack the one in the header first. I have just a die grinder here I'm going to use. If you at home you don't have an air compressor with a die grinder, you can usually pick up a Dremel or a similar rotary tool pretty cheap. That'll do it. They're fairly thin tack welds, so it doesn't require a whole lot of work to grind them down. What sometimes I have been able to do in the past is jam a big fat screwdriver or similar, like a round file or something like that, into the tube of the restrictor. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you can just crack those welds and get it to come out without having to grind them down. I'd say probably 9 times out of 10 that doesn't work. So best thing to do is just to go get yourself just a Dremel or something similar, because you're going to need that with the restrictor and the silencer anyway. Well, before we get started, I will just mention I like having eyes. Eyes are really useful for lots of different stuff. So if you're going to be doing this, definitely use some eye protection at a minimum. Now this is the restrictor we're going to be taking out here. You'll hopefully see there's a tack weld on either side holding it. They're fairly thin tack welds. So I'm just going to be using the die grinder to grind those down, get them a bit thinner. That way I can jam either a big screwdriver or a file into that restrictor hole and just crack the welds. I'll get it out and then I'll just clean up whatever's left of those tack welds afterwards. Really important, do not let that restrictor fall down into the exhaust, because it can get stuck in there and you'll never get it out and it'll be rattly in there forever and will be super annoying. Speaking from experience, unfortunately. The way this is broken free, I reckon if I'm lucky, I might just be able to hook it out. Out you come. There we go. Don't even really need to clean up those welds. They're, the tacks have just broken off really nicely. That's the culprit there. Bugger everything. So it's obviously just going to restrict the flow quite a lot. Alright, didn't really need the gloves for that last bit, but definitely do for this one. I'm going to pop this apart. It's just a couple of 10 mils here. Whoop. Okay, so easiest way, just to pull the end of it out like that. Whoop. Lose the gasket on the floor. I'll get that in a second. Okay, so see, again, beautiful quality from these Yasunis. They have an O-ring seal in there, so be careful of that. I'll pop the tube apart, put that to the side. And this is what you need the gloves for. This stuff here is like itching powder fabric that gets on your skin. It's basically like fiberglass insulation, same sort of thing. It's going to make you really damn itchy if it gets on you. So we'll pull this steel wool back, have a better look. Put that to the side too, careful not to damage it. That there is our restrictor. So you can see it's actually a tube that inserts down into the silencer cut, or the inner casing I guess you would call it, inside. It actually comes down to about here. So basically we just need to cut those two little welds either side and the whole thing will slide out. Carefully grind those tacks down, then we should be able to crack it off. What would have been a lot easier is just using a little grinder wheel on a Dremel, which is what we've done before, but our Dremel battery is actually broken, so I'm stuck using the die grinder today. Okay, let's have another crack at this, shall we? Let's be more successful already. There we go. Hopefully, next time I have to do this, we'll have fixed up our cutting wheel on the Dremel. I'm just going to tidy these welds up, these what's left of the tack welds, and we can put our silencer back together. Wish I could tell you there's an easy way of doing this, but it's just a bit of mucking around, really. Pretty much the same process if you're ever repacking your two-stroke exhaust. Same process basically. Okay, pretty happy with that. Just going to poke some of that packing back down. Hopefully, there we go. Alright, just poke that back down there. It's all pretty much out of the way and it's not blocking the hole, which is the most important thing. So I can do its job without affecting the performance. There we go. Next thing is to put the bracket on the end of the silencer. So these are the rubber bushes that I mentioned earlier, our spacers, tubes for the bushes. two main mounting bolts and the mounting bolt for the silencer to the rest of the exhaust pipe. On there. Okay, so these two Viton seals are what we want. Now it isn't essential, but I do find that it's a little bit helpful just to put a tiny bit of 2-stroke oil around those two rubber O-rings. We put it on in a moment. Really just need a dribble or 2-stroke on them. Okay, alright, I'm going to chuck that one on. Oh. I personally find that it's easier to do the top one first, because then the bottom one slides over it to get to its slot. Alright, going to grab our gasket that I dropped on the floor earlier. Slide that on. Okay, and now this one here, the spring usually goes towards the bottom, but just cross-reference against your exhaust. I know on the Yasunis, this little spring holder always goes towards the bottom, same direction as the outlet. Grab our 10 mils we took off. Alright. Now these don't need to be crazy tight, they just need to be firm. You don't want to snap or break anything. Here's our exhaust. Our next step is to put the bracket on. These used to come with a really good parts explosion, you know, a bit of paperwork showing you what bits went where and how to fit it, but then they just stopped supplying it with the kit. So not really understanding why they stopped doing that, but fortunately I've fit one or two of these in my time. These really nice little rubber bushes, they're part of the vibration management of this exhaust. Now the bracket, which is an easy mistake to make, the bracket goes behind the exhaust mounts. So, put that on. Yeah, don't make that mistake because it won't fit up properly. Now, one of the keys for fitting exhausts and having them fit nicely is to leave these bolts and nuts a little bit loose until everything is on the bike and you're happy with the positioning, then tighten them up. Because these holes on the bracket are actually a little bit elongated, so you have a little bit of movement there, a little bit of play, which Yasuni have done deliberately to make the fitment of the exhaust a bit easier. So that's all on there. I'm going to go ahead and chuck this on the bike and then we can worry about the silencer. Okie dokie, so a couple of big key hints I can give you here. Always put the header on first. Now with the zip in particular, I'll normally try and get at least one of the header nuts on first before I worry about the back of the bracket, trying to fit that. Okay. You know what, I'm going to try and get the other one on while I'm there. Okay, so I've got both of those header nuts in. I'm going to go ahead and chuck the main bracket mounts on. Now, same thing, just keeping everything loose so you've got plenty of play so you can get it in the spot that you need it to be. So those are just sort of sitting on there. I'm happy with that placement. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and tighten the header nuts first. They're the most important thing, and then we'll worry about the bracket bolts afterwards. Now, these header nuts I've seen many times before people snap them from over tightening the nuts. They just need to be firm. The flange works really well on these. It's gasketless. You don't need to make it crazy tight, it will seal. Usually my next step after that is tighten up the bracket mount to the engine. And again, this is a steel bolt going into an aluminium casing, so it really doesn't need to be super tight, just firm, because you don't want to strip the thread on the inside of the casing. Our bracket mounts are 13 rear, 13 front, so get a spanner in behind there. Tighten these ones up last. The reason I tighten these ones up last is the holes for these on the bracket are elongated, so they have the most adjustment of the system. So if something needs some give, these are the holes that are going to do it. Now if you tighten these up first, that takes away all the give. Now pen marking bolts is good practice. Usually do it at the top. Now the reason you pen mark, because exhausts vibrate, you want to know if they've come loose. Doesn't have to be anything crazy, just so you can reference back to it. Look, it's particularly after the first couple of rides that you want to check these pen marks they haven't moved, because if they're going to move, it's probably going to be within the first couple of rides. Now, one of the final steps, slide our silencer on. Now you'll see fairly quickly why I recommended doing these bolts first, because the silencer really interferes with them quite badly. The biggest concern is that you don't cross thread it, so just take your time. There we go. That's in. These little spring tools are really great. Usually they're for clutch springs, but they do also come in handy for quick release exhausts. Okay. Now if you have a keen eye, you might be wondering why I did the strap bolt up before putting the spring on. Now the reason being, this little flange here, one of the final and most important steps. I'm going to put the sticker on. Just going to put it where you think. Okay, so we fast forwarded a couple of weeks. I didn't have enough time to finish the tuning on the bike in the last lot of filming. So today we're going to be doing obviously the tuning. So we have our exhaust on there. If you've been following along with this bike, we'd previously put a Malossi Wild Line exhaust and then we've removed that exhaust, so the bike is still currently set up for that in terms of tuning. And then we've put a Malossi MHR replica cylinder kit in there. So basically the setup of the transmission and the carby is going to be completely wrong. Now if you'd watched our previous video on how to tune your carburetor, you'd know that we have a rough formula that we use for how much you should sort of, starting point, how much you should go up in the main jet when you're doing a cylinder kit and an exhaust, and then you just add those two together when you're doing a cylinder kit and an exhaust. So I know with the Zip that they're a 53 jet from stock, regardless of what's in the carby now. It's probably somewhere around a 65, something like that, being a Wild Line exhaust that was on there. So I'm going to go straight up to probably a 95. I'm going to start there. And this is going to be mega rich. It's going to splutter. It's not going to want to move. And I'm going to show you what that sounds like and what it looks like on the bike when it's trying to run. Now, if you're tuning your bike, you're copying this video and that's what you're doing, and it's really spluttery, it barely doesn't even want to move. It's like the choke's stuck on. That's exactly what you want for the first jet change. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to ballpark the rollers. I have a pretty good idea of what an MHR replica cylinder kit with the Yasuni R is going to be roller-wise. So I'm going to start off around 5 gram per roller. I'm probably going to end up pretty close to that. I think probably somewhere between 4.5 and 5.5. Every bike's a little bit different, which you wouldn't think would be the case, but it is. So always just sort of ballpark it first. So no more talking. I'm going to get into it. We're going to get the jet out. We're going to pull the transmission apart. We're going to get this thing tuned so we can take it for a blat around the car park. I'm going to start off with the transmission. I'll show you a trick. Getting the transmission cover off on the Zips can be a bit of a pain because of the floor pan. It's a similar issue on the SR50s because of the belly pan. It gets in the way. So these four, you've got 2 screws here, and these 4 screws on the top of the floor. Pop these fellas out. If you can navigate popping the floor up just enough, you'll see that the belly pan actually clips over the floor bolt here. So if you can just pop that off, you'll get full access. It's way easier to work on. Because we're going to be changing the rollers, this is the nut we need to get off. You can do this with a transmission locking tool if you have one, and a ratchet, or a rattle gun. These electric ones are pretty cheap and easy to pick up now. Now I'm going to try and keep this assembly all together. Much easier to put back on after. I'm going to squeeze the torque driver and push the belt down into it. That way the belt just comes off nicely. Usually pull the pinion out because these just get in the way. Honestly, really annoying half the time. They fall out and roll under the bench. It's much easier just to take them off. You don't have to worry about it till later. Alright, got our scale here. So just out of curiosity, wouldn't mind seeing what's currently in the bike. It's got a combination of rollers. These look like factory because they're pink, so they're probably going to be 7.5. Got our orange ones. I reckon these are some old Leo Vince ones. Yep, 5.7. So averaging at the moment about 6.6 with the obviously still set up for the Wild Line. So as I mentioned, we're going to go straight to 5 gram. Got our Malossi 5 gram rollers here. How cool are these new Malossi roller containers? If you have a whole bunch of them, they actually lock together. You can stack them up and they lock together. They're really cool. Much better than the old packets they used to use. So these are 5, and it's a measurement anyway. Yep, 5 gram. Happy days. Now, a couple of things. Look, you might be thinking, if you've watched a lot of our videos, Brad, you always say change one thing at a time. Well, unfortunately, when you're first starting out, like getting ready for your first ride, you kind of have to ballpark it. You've got to guess kind of everything as a bit of a starting point. Now, on that note, with starting points, I've always said with jets, start high, work your way down. The opposite is true with rollers. With rollers, my personal preference is to start low and work my way up. The bike's revving out, not really moving. Okay, well, the rollers are just too light. You can work your way back up. If the rollers are too heavy, as I mentioned in our carb tuning video, some bikes, and the Minarelli engine and the Yamaha is really common for this. If the rollers are too heavy, it'll actually cause the bike to splutter. Now, usually a bike spluttering means it's rich, which you know, can sort of throw you. So my personal preferences with rollers, always start low, and then at the end, once you're happy with your jet, you can kind of creep your roller weight back up and see how it feels, and just sort of find that happy medium. But yeah, start low is a bit easier. I reckon this is probably going to end up about 5.5, which is why I've got the 5.5s here, but we'll see how we go. Slide our Variator back on, teeth lined up, squeeze our belt back into a torque driver so we can get it nice and comfortably on there. Now, as I mentioned, you keep this together, it's much easier to put back on at the end, and look at that. Now, the biggest thing you want to avoid here is the belt getting caught between. So essentially here we've got the shaft, the Variator shaft, and this outer fan pulley, or the metallic part of it, is supposed to be butting up directly on the end of the shaft here, right? Now, if our belt is here, it's going to get in the way, it's going to bind up, and it's going to cause the fan pulley not to actually be pressed against that shaft. So you want to really have lots of slack here to make sure that it's metal on metal. You hear that clinking noise? And you want your belt to be nice and slack behind there. So if you tighten it against that belt and not against the metal, as soon as that belt moves, now your nut's loose and you're going to blow your transmission apart. Now, because I know I'm almost definitely going to have to change these rollers again, I'm just going to put probably 3 or 4 bolts in the transmission. I'm not going to do them all up. Okay. Time for our jet. Now, to change our main jet, we actually don't need to take the whole carb off. The much easier option is to just release the carb from the intake manifold and from the carb just by those 2 hose clamps. And we can sort of pop the carb off and lift it over the exhaust bracket here with a rag, and take our bowl off. Obviously, when you take the bowl off, all the fuel's gonna fall out of the bowl. So just put a rag on there to catch it so it doesn't fall over the bike. All right, hose clamps are released. Now, these can be a bit of a pain to get off. Piaggio airbox on the zip is just horrible. If you haven't taken it off in a long time, it almost like glues itself on. The rubber sticks to the metal. It's so painful to get off. Yeah. The whole hose is pulled out of the airbox before it wanted to come off the carb. Perfect example of why these are such a pain. Try not to rip this. Let's get it to release. There we go. I'm gonna have to pop that back in. I must say, as much of a pain as pod filters are, on the Zip in particular, it is a huge selling point of a pod filter how much easier it makes changing the jet and working on the carb. Because, oh my god, it is so painful navigating these Piaggio Zip airboxes, trying to get the carb off, especially when you have to do it 7 or 8 times in a row. You can get really frustrated really quick. Okay, so that fella there is our main jet. Now, one thing I'm going to mention, this is our float. Now, the float sits on a pin just through here. It sits in these little metal holders and the pin goes through. These fall out all the time. They're just sitting in there, and because it's sitting on an angle, you'll see, oh, it actually slipped through a little bit. So that's another reason for the rag, that if that pin falls out, it'll hopefully fall into the rag, because these fall out almost every single time. It's really annoying. What have we got? 62, very close to what I thought, around the 65. Okay, got our 95 jet here. Doesn't need to be crazy tight, just needs to be firm. Pull back on gently. The right way might be a good idea. Alright. That's exactly the same thing with these carb screws. You're not trying to make them crazy tight, you're just trying to make them firm. Alright, I'll get the carb back on. Now I just thought I'd mention, I've got the carb back on, but if you're having a lot of trouble trying to do it by the method that I just described, it's because there's an extra bolt just here on the left hand side of the bike that holds the airbox in, that sort of bolts the front of it down. Now I didn't remove this because the rest of the airbox, because it's this weird sort of L shape, it's really hard to get in around these cables. It's really painful and I hate doing it. I've done it so many times, I just hate it. So I would rather struggle a little bit getting it into these, into the intake manifold and into the mouth of the carb than I would rather struggle trying to get this stupid thing in. It's up to you. If you're having a lot of trouble with it, release that bolt there. It's just a Phillips bolt, and the airbox will be a lot more compliant. Okay, we've increased our main jet up to a 95, and we've put the lighter rollers in there. So we're pretty much ready to take it for a little blast around the car park now. I'm just going to pop that belly pan back up so it's safe to ride. If this is you at home, don't put the whole bike back together, because you're just going to have to pull it back apart again. So just put it just together enough that it's safe to ride for a quick 100 or so meter test ride. That's all you'll need to know that it's crazy rich, which is all we're looking for right now. One more thing I'll mention is that if this is you at home working on your bike, it's very normal after you change the main jet for the bike to either not start straight away, or for it to start and then cut out after about a second, and then take 10 to 20 seconds to actually start back up again and run. We've just emptied all the fuel out of the bowl. So we need to give the bowl a chance to fill back up, for fuel to work its way up through the main jet and back into the engine. That initial start is just because there's a little bit of fuel still left in the passages of, in the crank or around the cylinder area, so it starts and then it runs out pretty much straight away. Totally normal, expect it to happen. Definitely rich. Definitely an improvement, but we're still rich. We'll keep going. Passes the burnout check. We've landed at an 80, which to be honest is a little bit leaner than most of the time what I would have expected this bike would have ended up at, but it actually it helps the point that I made earlier, which is every bike is a little bit different. I would have expected this probably be closer to about 85, but it was crazy rich, as you saw, on 85, and it started running really well on 80. Now I suspect it's maybe just ever so slightly rich, but you would have seen this. Well, I did quite a few laps because it was still a bit spluttery at the start. Even a minute in, after 2 or 3 laps, it was still every now and again just having a little splutter cut out, like a little nah, da, da, da. And then I did a couple more laps and it completely cleaned up and it was just beautiful. I think that's probably pretty good. And to be honest, my personal preference, I'd rather have a bike ever so slightly rich than have it slightly lean. Because say you have a cold day and you're right on the edge, if you have a big long 2-minute full throttle period where it's, you know, really running at its limit, you're getting pretty risky there. So my personal preference, this is my bike, I would leave it at this. You could probably go down to a 78 and see, but man, it's running really nicely how it is, so I'm going to leave it. And the next step for this bike, this shop zip, the next step we're going to be doing a big transmission tune breakdown video, similar to the one that we did on carby tuning. We're going to actually do it to this bike, not just explain it. Because I think this bike could really do with some a big transmission upgrade. Putting MHR Variator on a standard 50, like it's going to be better, but you're really not getting the full benefit from it because you don't have that additional power to sort of fiddle with and try and really get the absolute best from. With this bike, now that it has an MHR rep, has the Yasuni R exhaust, it's sort of getting up to that higher level street build, so I think it would really benefit from some sort of higher end mid-race to sort of low-level racing parts. Thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully there was some useful info in there for you. I can explain this stuff, but it's often so much more beneficial to see it and hear it in real life on a scooter, because then you can understand it a bit better. As always, if you have any questions, guys, please let us know in the comments. We endeavour to answer every single question. And if you want to stay up to date with this zip build that we're doing and all of our other sort of instructional, educational videos on scooter tuning that we do, make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for some more stuff.